Hey, Wally.
Yeah.
I think to begin, I'd like to know what the book is and what it is not.
Right. Well, this is quite a controversial, that might be the most controversial question. Because, let's be frank, there have been descriptions of, and who cares, but this is an event having to do with the book. So there have been incorrect descriptions that have been, circulated in very distinguished places, maybe even quite nearby. Anyway, this book, Night Thoughts, is not, people have said in print, on the web, that it's a collection of essays, anecdotes, and conversation starters. I intended it to be one essay into which I've, poured my heart and soul. I believe in it, and I don't think there are any anecdotes in it, or anyway, it's one thing. And yet all books are divided into sections, really. So someone could be misled.
To be fair, maybe the person who wrote it didn't get a chance to read it. It is very long.
Yeah.
But all that being said, the book feels like a stream of consciousness. There are jumps, not like huge jumps, but there's a lot of tangents that kind of like loosely connect through the whole book, and it feels really appropriate to me, at least, because it's called Night Thoughts, and I think many of us since last November have had trouble sleeping and have had these big questions in our head that go on and on and on. One question leads to the next question, leads to the next question, until you worry yourself to sleep. And this feels like you wrote down a night of that. And it ends, I would think, in a very hopeful way. But still, like you take us on this journey. Was that intentional? Was this written in a night where you could not go to bed, or was this kind of weeks and weeks of tension leading up to this?
Yes, I would say it was, written over months, but the idea is that it's sort of a night's thoughts, and it does have the freedom that one sometimes has at night to make irrational or seemingly irrational leaps from one thing to the next. Although my fantasy is that by the time you've read the whole thing, it all fits together rather logically, except for the parts that are self-contradictory, because I think there may be some.
Well, but I think, which is normal, right? Like, people aren't consistent. They have it feels like this book is a battle that is happening within yourself, like between what feels like justified misanthropy and hope. Like, it seems like those are constantly battling throughout this book.
Well, the book slightly is, misanthropy is an incomplete word, almost not severe enough to describe, in a way, the story of the writer of the book is the story of someone who was born into a world where everybody that I met or everybody that I knew was quite proud to be a human and excited about the possibilities that this amazing creature offered. And I suppose my life has been a process of realizing that the creature is a terrifying creature who has been entrusted with much, much more power than he can handle. And I'm wondering what to do about that. What should we feel about that?
You say that the way we've treated the planet and the world over the course of its history is much like a child torturing a small animal. That's strongly worded.
Yeah. Well, certainly, you know, nobody who is alive today and thinking about it can see it any other way. I mean, it wasn't people torturing other people was intended and planned. The torture of the planet began as an accident, but it's continued on purpose, not out of the sadism that may motivate torture of human beings, but, you know, out of some kind of delusions of grandeur based on greed.
You say that you don't trust people in part because people don't know themselves. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is really my I don't know that everybody knows this in a way, but for me it's been a shock, and it has a lot of political implications that we know it as individuals, that we do things and then we say, my God, why did I do that? I'm really surprised that I did that. Why did I do that? And of course, with our friends, loved ones, and people who we observe and read about, we sort of see that as individuals, they do things that we think, well, that's uncharacteristic of that person. That's unusually cruel or unusually thoughtless. They didn't mean to do it, but they somehow were swept up in some kind of emotion, and they did it. When you take it, if you take it on board, as British people say, that the whole species does not understand itself and is not even close, then you see some of the problems that came up in the 20th century with, for example, the Soviet Union or China, where people with very, very good motives ended up doing things that were very regrettable. And yet these were tremendously smart people. None of us sitting here today is actually smarter than those people. Well, no, maybe you. but most people in this room are not, smarter than those people. And so, I don't know. You have to. You have to say there are things that went on that they didn't know they were doing and that they didn't understand, but that killed a lot of innocent people. And so you sort of, I don't know, when I say there are self-contradictory things in my book, I honestly don't think that a species like ours should be entrusted with very much power. I don't think any of us as individuals should be trusted with power, and I don't think that the whole group should be trusted with power. And I think there's a lot of self-deception that is an incredibly important force in the human being, which is very alarming. And nobody is immune to self-deception. Even the brightest people are possibly even better at it than less bright people. So, I don't know, there's and a lot of things, good fortune increases your tendency to deceive yourself. And I sort of say in the book that the use of violence also tends to increase a person's tendency to deceive himself.
You split the world up into two distinct types of people in the book, the lucky and the unlucky. And you could have split it many number of ways, whether it's the North, the South, the East, or the West. You could have split it by the haves or the have-nots. Why did you choose the lucky and the unlucky?
I suppose I'm trying to use the simplest and most direct language. I do think the world is divided into everybody sort of knows, everybody doesn't know what category they themselves are in necessarily, but everybody knows that there are people who are, let's say, giving the orders and those who are basically receiving them. There are people who are collecting the cash, and there are people who are handing it over. We all sort of know that. So I think using that phrase, lucky and unlucky, basically some people are stronger than others, and there's no reason why they should be except for luck. They're not better. They're not nicer. They're not people that anybody has elected to be stronger, but they are stronger because of luck. And I suppose after years of brooding about it, I suppose I've come to think that morality means that those people who have been given more strength by luck actually don't have a right to lord it over everybody else. I think that's what morality means, that yes, luck has given more strength to this person and not that person, but when he uses the strength to overpower the one who doesn't have it, that's wrong.
In the book, the lucky doesn't just refer to world leaders, to the 1%, to nobles, to people who've, hereditary money. It's not that the 1% is, the lucky is much broader in your book, and you kind of, we're all part of that lucky, all of us can be a part of that lucky demographic. It seems like, it's an indictment of privilege and just the flimsiness of it. Was that a big struggle for you? I mean, does that illustrate a struggle you've had for a while to understand your place in it? The fact that you're not without fault in it. We are all part of it, and we all benefit from it.
Well, that's been something I've been obsessed with ever since it first occurred to me. I do think we all have every, I don't know, just looking out across the room, I'm thinking, and I don't, if I'm insulting any individual, let me know. But it's not the 1%. The people in this room are not the 1%, but I'm going to go so far as to say many of the people in this room are in the 20%. People who are, in my definition, lucky and enjoy privilege because even, you could say, in my view, 40% of Americans and Europeans are doing quite nicely, and their good fortune, sadly and even tragically, does rest on the exploitation of the other people all over the world. And it's good to denounce the 1%, and we all enjoy that, and we should do it, and it's true. But we also, I think, have to admit that many of us, even in this room, even though we're not in the 1%, are still benefiting, for example, from being Americans or Europeans and living at a very high standard of living compared to the great majority of the people on Earth. And the horrible things that have been done in our name, which many of us in this room may have denounced, may have benefited us. Not all of them, but, cheap oil, for example, or cheap clothes made by people who are paid horrifying low wages. We do benefit from these things, and so you have to say that the status quo in the world, which is, based on dictatorships that in many cases the United States has bolstered or even imposed, the beneficiaries are partly us, even if we have denounced the wars that made those benefits possible. And obviously, the destruction of the Native American people and slavery are not going on anymore, but they made it possible for this to become the rich country that it is. So there's a certain amount of, this is something that one ought to be aware of as, Obama and, I don't know, Harry Truman, Eisenhower were not necessarily terrifying people like Trump, but they did many of the same things that he cheerfully is pleased to admit that he does.
You discuss a world where the unlucky was to potentially seize power from the lucky. And you write how if you were confronted with an army of the unlucky, you would back down, you would give up your life and all your belongings because you felt you didn't deserve them to begin with. You were fortunate enough to get them. Really?
Well, I think, you know, the book does, in a way, you know, speak of the possibility that the oppression of the unlucky could change one day. And I believe in it. I mean, I think that the starvation, death, agony, suffering that is partly imposed by lucky people, whether you want to say, oh, it's just Trump and his friends, or whether you want to take on the possibility that we ourselves are involved, it's unbearable. And I have to say, I think it should end. I think the way the world is organized is wrong, and it should end. So then the question comes, if it were actually to happen that the lucky would be deposed, what should happen to those people? Myself, for example. And in a way, I'm saying, well, don't kill me, because I'm, you know, I'd rather just give up than be killed. And I don't actually believe in having more than you. And I'm not now in the final moments, as you suggest, if someone were to come and say, well, we're taking over your apartment, you're going to live on the street or however you can live, but you won't be living in your apartment anymore because we're living in it. Would I physically get into a fight with the person who was telling me that? I feel I don't know. Of course, my instincts might kick in, and I might start biting and scratching that guy on my way out the door. I don't know, but I feel that my whole life has prepared me to go quietly, and I feel that a sort of self-weakening process on the part of the bourgeoisie in preparation for that day could mean that there would be less violence. And I think that would make for a better world. But, you know, if you think I know him and I see what he is, and he would be, you know, he'll be kicking those people and fighting until he's carried away. I don't know. You know, I would hope not.
But I mean, I also took it to mean that regardless of your reaction in that moment, because you also say, like, I would not join the army of the lucky. I would not support that movement. Like, there's also that larger idea, right, of my time has come. Like, it was time to give up everything. I was lucky enough to have it for this long. I'm not going to support the resistance of those who have money and those who have power, because their time has passed. Is that a fair?
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, everything you've summarized is superbly summarized. So thank you. But
We're recording it, right?
yeah,
Okay. Good.
yes.
You also talk about the possibility, if there ever is that uprising, if there ever is a change of power where the unlucky now have control, that punishment does not solve anything. Punishment almost recreates the cycle that we've lived in already, and we've seen in other situations how those who end up having power recreate the same processes. And we've also seen how truth and reconciliation could work, for example, in the South African example post-apartheid. And I totally understand that. So my first question is, why no punishment? And secondly, can we at least have a few people that we punish? We can agree to the list together in this room right now if that's best.
Well, I do say in the book that I don't really believe in punishment. And you can say, well, you just want to save your own ass. I mean, you're one of the people who would be spared. I think two things about punishment. First of all, I actually think it's irrational because I don't, and this is something that most people don't really agree with, and I sort of try to make my case in the book as best as I can, but I don't actually think that I am better than, let's say, Trump or different from him. I think I just had different experiences, and I was taught different things, and I was brought up differently. He was brought up to think that Roy Cohn was the greatest man of our time, and he believed it. I don't actually think that the people who do bad things are worse than me or different from me. I just think they've had very different experiences. So that to punish them, for me to say, well, I think what you did was terrible, and I'm going to punish you, that means you're saying, I don't think I would have done that, even if I'd had your life. So I don't really believe that. I think if I'd had that guy's life, I would have done those things. The other thing is, that's my first feeling about punishment. My second is, I think it's very bad for the people who are doing it. And I think it turns them into, it takes a grain of sadism that they have and increases it. And I do think that there actually would be very little point in having an enormous upheaval where the unlucky overthrew the lucky if the possession of power and the use of punishment and revenge made the people who had seized power into the same sort of monsters that they'd replaced. That would be pitiful, and it's happened more than once.
I mean, the U.S. would be an example, right? like from 1776 on. Like it seems like that's basically what it's been.
Yeah, I mean they certainly our kings are worse than King George. I mean, our current kings are much more frightening than he was, much more oppressive. They've killed a lot more people.
You talk a great deal about your education in the book, both as kind of the foundation of who you are now and also as what has prepared you to, give everything up if that was to happen. Can you talk more about the impact your teachers had on you and why they still have an impact today?
Well, I'm quite obsessed with my teachers. I went to schools that, I was brought up in a privileged way, and I went to what at that time were called and actually were progressive schools. Some of them have become militantly unprogressive in later years, but I went to private schools where there were a lot of teachers who didn't believe in the way of life of the people who were paying the bills for the schools. I mean, there were a lot of very interesting teachers who were, I would say they were bohemians, if we use that word. They were almost beatniks. This is going back many years. Some of them were people who probably wouldn't get a job teaching today because they were a little more, and that may be, they certainly wouldn't get the jobs in the same schools necessarily, but this is in the 1950s. A lot of people turned up in these private schools as teachers who were against competition. They were against aggrandizement of the self. They were against greed. And they were against the ruthless pursuit of power and money. And some of them were consciously against capitalism, I suppose, although nobody ever mentioned that. Although there were some who'd heard of those words, I happen to know, but they didn't mention them. But these teachers were quite inspiring to me, and I mention in the book that my friends, the people who were my friends when I was, 10, and even I myself, we've all been downward mobile, to use the phrase that was used in the 50s. Now, downwardly mobile is what people might say today. We're less powerful, less distinguished, less respected, and less wealthy, roughly speaking, than our parents were. And partly through the influence of these people, so that we have been involved in a self-weakening process since a very early age, since childhood, into turning ourselves into weak little worms, in a way.
Towards the end of the book, there's a great discussion about the lucky today and who they are, and the fact that the lucky has even more access and control of resources and knowledge and tools that can be used to actually create a greater equality, and they don't use it, and there's a certain selfishness and a narrow-mindedness for simple pleasures. You never use the phrase Kardashian, but it's implied. So, and you know the role of the lucky is important here. So, what do we do? Because I mean, clearly you're against the whole idea of a violent revolution, because that just seems to create more violent revolution and more oppression. But like, so what do we do?
Thank you. You know, you're asking. I mean, you're asking the. You're asking the question that you know very well. I can't answer it. I do think. I believe in what democratic socialists call a revolution from below, which really doesn't. Obviously, if everybody agreed with everything that I think, there could be a very, very radical change in society without the shedding of blood. I mean, there could be a rational discussion among the human beings on the planet that would lead to very radical change. I mean, in the book, I talk quite a bit about what you might call, not getting into the Kardashians exactly, but the fact that we need the wise people from the past, and we need to train ourselves to be, roughly speaking, smarter. I mean, people, you know, to use an example from today's headlines, there was the election of people in Georgia. The two sides in this race for a House seat spent, I think, together $55 million on this election. And people contributed on the reactionary side, and they contributed on the liberal side. And the reactionaries contributed $5 more, and so the liberals had to contribute $6 more, and $55 million were spent. Well, you think about this, it's all about idiotic television ads that if people had realized their full potential to think and to analyze, those ads would be worthless. No one would be paying money for them because everybody would see how stupid they were and would see through them. I do feel a sort of de-education has been imposed on poor people. It's been forced on them. They've been told from birth, we're defining you as sub-intellectual. You're not going to learn how to analyze, think, reason. We've decided that you're not going to get a good education, and you are going to enjoy only the crudest forms of art and thought. And then most of the people in this room have been told, hey, you are going to get a good education and you're going to be able to learn anything you like, But somehow most of us have chosen a kind of willful simplicity, and we don't read difficult books, we don't listen to difficult music, and we've sort of trained ourselves to be unsmart, which is not going to help us make this nonviolent revolutionary change that we're talking about. We really need to be everything that we can be. If we were everything that we could be, I think, who knows, it could be possible. And when I say we, I mean everybody.
I think this is a good place to stop, to open it up to the audience. If they have any questions for Wally.
I have a mic, so I can hand it over to you. Would you pass this down?
I wanted to say, first of all, your recent play, Evening at the Talk House, was fantastic and prescient and resonant. And in that spirit, are there any plans to revive other prescient, resonant works like Aunt Dan and Lemon and The Designated Mourner?
Well, this is a very nice question. We just did revive The Designated Mourner in Los Angeles. And it did seem to be true that people were, they were ready for it in a surprising way. People found it easier to understand than at all the previous times that we had done it. This is speaking in an arcane language about plays that many of you may never have heard of, but I write plays, and this wonderful man sees plays.
Hi, thanks for coming. There's an interesting section in the book that I read on bin Ladenists and how oppressed children, I should say, of this generation who grew up Muslim feel the built-up frustration and sort of lean towards that bin Ladenist mindset. Now, I grew up as a Muslim, and there's times where I felt that stereotype or prejudice, but what separates me, from your perspective, from them? Would it be privilege from that sort of steers me away from that brainwashed concept as a Muslim? So again, you have those children in the slums that have frustration and get brainwashed, and you have me that sort of tries to grasp different experiences. So again, what do you think separates me from them in a way?
I'm obviously forced to guess, and you may say, well, you're quite wrong. But I think, in a way, the book is very much about the fight against the movements that I'm vaguely calling bin Ladenist, even though many of the participants don't like bin Laden, just because I don't want to use most of the other terms that people use. I think most young people in the Western world who are sympathetic to that ISIS and other movements that use a lot of violence. Most of those people have personally suffered themselves in the West from being oppressed. They've been given bad opportunities and look forward to a bad life as oppressed people in the West, but they and they also are sympathetic people who, when they see how their co-religionists have been treated in the world, they're compassionate and upset and angry, and they want to help. I mean, I don't know you, but I mean, I'm guessing that somehow, whatever torments you may have faced, they have not driven you to abandon a rational approach to how the world could change. I mean, the approach of ISIS is obviously disliked by people in the West because we're afraid that they're going to come and kill us. But it's not really ultimately, in my view, a beneficial approach for the people who are following it. I don't think it is the way that's going to lead to a better life for those people. And I think you have to be a little bit, you have to be blinded by emotion to decide that you're going to join that group.
Hi. I haven't read your book yet, but I've read some critics and what you're saying. I have a question. There have been many movements before, and I feel like you have lived some of the movements. Why do you feel we end up with the same leaders over and over again? When do you feel like we lost kind of our hope or our vision for the more progressive movements?
Well, do you mean? I mean, in this country, I don't think. I mean, this is a good moment for progressive movements in the United States. I mean, it's wow. Compared to 10 or 15 years ago, it's almost mind-boggling how many more people are sympathetic to progressive ideas. But I do think, yeah, power doesn't make you a progressive person. When people take power, they're, I don't know, it's an anti-progressive moment. The moment when you suddenly are in charge, you're beginning to think, wow, how can I control all these other people who may be frighteningly going in a million chaotic directions? I'd better exert more control over them. And the people who I've always hated, I think I really would like to smite them. You begin to think very unprogressive thoughts. It's easier to be progressive when you're out of power, and the dream is to think of how progressive people could stay progressive if they're in power, namely by not being in so much power. I mean, power, power should be distributed, shared. There shouldn't be big centers of power.
There's a woman in the back and also a woman up here.
Hi. Since we're in a bookstore, just wondering, do you have any recent reads that you would recommend, other than your own, of course?
I haven't written a book yet, no.
Yeah. Any books that you would recommend?
Lindy West wrote a lovely book called Shrill, which I think is great. She's also a friend, so that's biased. It is very good. Naomi Klein wrote a wonderful book that just came out, also on Haymarket. What else do you like, Molly?
I know I have read some books. Can I come back to it if I am able to? Yeah, if I sit here and think about what books I'd recommend, that could be a sort of performance art piece of could last all night. I'm also very secretive about what books I've read. I really don't consider it anybody's business, but I do want to answer the question. But I have to come back to it if I come back to it.
There's a question over. Yes, right here. Yeah.
Going back and talking about your plays, I thought that Designated Mourner and Aunt Anne and Lemon were pretty realistic, and then I loved the fact that Talk House was kind of dystopic. If you're writing anything now, might you go into the dystopic vein again?
This is about what I might write in the future. Well, most of my plays don't take place in a real place. And none of them so far have taken place in a joyful, happy place. So that's dystopian, I guess. Yeah, I've avoided getting bogged down in specific places where people would bicker over the facts. I mean, I've been afraid that people would say, well, Honduras doesn't actually have 150 people in its parliament. It actually has 140 people. And I just have never wanted to get into that.
So we have time for just a couple more questions.
There was somebody in the back over there. Yes.
Hi. So in reading an excerpt from your short story, The Lucky, I sort of interpreted your definition of that as saying, maybe suggesting that there is a better alternate reality for those who are lucky, or a better world, sort of. So then, is that kind of suggesting that one should not use their privilege to their advantage, or that it's better to have a more simplistic way of living? Or I don't know if you could maybe explain a little bit about that.
Well, that's a heavy question, which is, if you are a privileged person and, should you take advantage of that, or should you try to diminish your own privilege on an individual basis? I admire people who have, for example, been born with inherited wealth and have given it away. And I'm in awe of people who have given up a good job and a good life in a comfortable environment and gone to work for Doctors Without Borders and lived in terrifying places and risked their life. I mean, obviously, I admire those people, and I haven't done that, but yes, do I admire them more than I admire myself? Yes. Of course I do. I think there are I think it's obviously some people enjoy privilege so much that they devote their lives to, for example, money. And there are others who are satisfied with X amount and don't try to get more. I mean, I personally am sort of a hedonist. I enjoy the pleasures of life, and I have, I enjoy cultivating my own brain to the extent that it's capable of being cultivated. But I don't set and I have, there are things that I could have done that would have made me much more prosperous, or that I could have made. I've had some opportunities to make money that I've rejected because I didn't approve of the thing I was being asked to do. But on the other hand, I have personally earned a certain amount of money on purpose. I mean to say, when I have lived a bourgeois lifestyle to a very large extent through good luck. I mean, yeah, I don't. There definitely, I have tried on purpose to make enough money to live in a way that I find agreeable, but I don't find, I don't dislike bourgeois people or even the rich, but I don't hold that out as an ideal either. I mean, if you said, well, do you respect the person who goes to work for Doctors Without Borders more, or do you respect, the real estate tycoon more? I respect the doctor more.
Is there time for one more? Yeah. One more. I think there was a question right next to you. Yeah.
Is there any place in your somewhat dystopic vision for choice and evolution? Is there such a thing as not feeling guilty or being a good but self-sufficient, sufficient, well-off person?
For me, not really. It's not a feeling. I think it's a fact that we are involved in horrifying crimes. I mean, we support the Israelis who have cut the electricity of the Gazans down to 2 hours a day so that all their food would spoil. We've support the Saudis who are killing people in Yemen and causing a cholera epidemic. I mean, we're involved. Our taxes are involved. So, it's not about a feeling. I find it. I can't not have the feeling because the feeling is based on the reality.
But isn't there room for the individual to transform and evolve and do the best they can as an individual?
She asks, but can't an individual try to be as good a person as they can be as an individual? Obviously, yes. And I mean, obviously, I have a higher regard for you if you are becoming a better person. You're kinder to the people that you know in your life rather than if you were a cold, selfish person who treated the people in your life horribly. I mean, of course, this is a step in the right direction. It's great.
It sounded like necessarily power and luck and money, which are, passively assign you to the bad path. But power can be used beneficently.
She says that it sounds as if I'm saying that if you have luck and power, you're automatically assigned to the camp of the bad people, but power can be used beneficially. And, obviously there are, for example, people with money who devote their whole lives to giving it away, and they're saving lives and doing great things. I wouldn't deny it, and I personally strive to be happy. I believe in it. I want to be happy. I go to concerts where I hear music that makes me happy. But I don't ever completely get away from the awareness of what's going on out there and my connection to it.
It sounds like you're saying we were all kind of born to be accomplices to the system, and it's our job, even though that is a fact. We are accomplices to the system by our mere existence. It's our job to destroy that system from within. It doesn't take away the fact that we're still accomplices to the crime, but we still have to make amends now as individuals after the fact, after we're born into it.
I believe that.
Right. I think this is a great time to end today's event. While it'll be around signing books, and you can say hello then. So thank you very much.
You're so great. Thank you. Thank you.